So our next speaker is Jose Gonzalez, and he is the founder of Latino Outdoors. He is an experienced educator with K-12 public education. He's an environmental education advisor, an outdoor education instructor, an illustrator, and a science communicator. And he's been working with the staff of many of our agencies over the last years and more intensely over the last many months as we kind of adjust to the new reality that we're in and the rise in our understanding of the societal pressures that we're under and organizational pressures. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jose. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hello. Thank you, everybody. Glad I could pop right in here. I may have a few slides to show at the end of my short talk. So just giving a heads up to the presenter. If not possible, then it's completely okay. Well, first of all, buenos dias, everybody. Good morning. I greet you all from the ancestral, traditional, and stolen lands of the Maidu, Miwok, and others, now Sacramento. This serves as a reminder not merely that the lands on which we work, gather, recreate, and travel were originally stewarded by many tribes, indigenous communities, and nations of this here Turtle Island, Aviala, Oasis America, Pachamama, and other names for this land, past and present. And that also, this is but one step in a reparative process that is justice-oriented and addresses historic and systemic inequities and injustices. And with that, that is how we start. So that as we tackle this work together, we do not shy away from the complexity of the problems as we engage in the creativity of solutions. We are familiar with climate change, this part of what you're here. We have the maps, as you have also noticed and seen, that show the risk of sea level rise. And now we increasingly face more frequent and intense wildfires. We look at a variety of options for mitigation and adaptation, and for example, the restoration of wetlands and more. And part of the challenge in addressing the work needed to face climate change is having a general public that feels invested in both understanding and doing something about it. And not just in individual action, but of course in collective policy change. The issue can include complexity and nuance, part of why it's often called a wicked problem by some scientists and policymakers, and an associated sense of urgency that is also stressed with evolving terms that may be climate chaos, climate crisis, and climate breakdown, for example. Nonetheless, in action, we know in action is a choice of great consequence. And this is part of why we're here. We're invested, we care, we want to change course as best as we can. And so this can serve as a reference point in engaging the work of equity and ultimately of tackling systemic injustices, hence a term like climate justice. Much as with climate science, it can be easy to get stuck in academic discourse on defining justice as a theory, as a practice, and its corresponding applications by government entities and mainstream environmental organizations, noting that there is not always a simple way to arrive at just one standard simple definition. However, it is important to acknowledge the contributions and foundational frameworks of grassroots organizations and movements, since that has served as a major propellant for the work. As Goldsberg and Collins note in From Environmental to Climate Change and the Discourse of Environmental Justice, the principles for climate justice are clear and consistent with a focus on local impacts and experience, inequitable vulnerabilities, the importance of community voice, and demands for community sovereignty and functioning. This is a helpful point to center our discourse of climate justice on the human element in terms of the disparate impact, the harmful, unequal effects that result from a more chaotic and disruptive climate. And this is not to discount the impact of climate change on all living things, but it does help to understand how sometimes, quote unquote, caring about the polar bears is not sufficient in some cases, and how focusing solely on such can be counterproductive if the impacts on marginalized human communities is ignored. And thus these terms that I use matter: centering, disparate impact, marginalized. Not from any need to keep a running social justice glossary, but to pay attention and to focus, to center, so that as we look at the impact of rising sea levels and plan for corresponding mitigation and adaptation strategies, we do so in the context of communities often not centered. We're also looking at the tools and frameworks that can ensure that we do not perpetuate systemic privileges and inequities that continue to have Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities too often be the hit first and hit worst. So that justice is not merely a term, it is a practice and outcome. As scholar Margaret Hulbert notes in Evaluating Climate Justice, Attitudes and Opinions of Individual Stakeholders in the United Nations Framework Climate Change Convention Conference of the Parties, we can look at what that means in terms of a definition of climate justice that includes legal justice, distributive justice, participatory justice, and ethical practice. And ultimately to center on a point that climate change is an issue of justice, as climate change can undermine the human rights of those who least contributed to the problem. And what can this mean for the Bay Area and even specific areas within? Well, looking at a map of the Bay Area now is to also see the effects and consequences of history, of policy choices, of what we deemed important and valuable to protect. We see that in the amount of protected landscapes, valued, scenic, recreational, ecological gems, all of which I've enjoyed myself, living in Marin County, living in the South Bay, living in the East Bay, and enjoying the wide variety of local, regional, state, and national parks. And we also see it in other stark contrasts. Our reality is that the Bay Area at large and even specific areas such as Marin County are racially segregated. These patterns are not natural, random, or simply the result of individual housing preferences. They are a byproduct of exclusionary policies that included private housing discrimination, redlining as an example. This is important to acknowledge because it has effects on the social justice challenges we must also face at the moment. As we tackle the complex problem of climate change, we cannot leave out additional inconvenient truths. That Black lives matter, that Native sovereignty matters, that systemic inequities are not random and inconsequential, that there is a need, a necessity for climate justice if we truly mean the values found in our respective mission and vision statements. And yes, this can be uncomfortable. They may be conversations we often find or have found ways to avoid. But in experiencing any fragility in this, I see it as an invitation to see that any discomfort from this is a source of learning and growth, to do better, to understand tension and address conflict with intention. So that when we look at the maps of the future we created, it reflects not just the choices of a region adapted to climate change, but also of a more just society. The choices we make now in the face of climate change, along with racial justice, will dictate what those maps will look like in the future, the Bay Area of 50 years from now, in 100 years and beyond. Can we do it? Yes, I believe we can. We know climate change cares little for borders and does not respect jurisdictional boundaries, hence the ever-increasing need and call for collective action. It touches much, it touches all. As we tackle issues that may too easily be deemed, quote unquote, out of our lane, issues like exclusionary zoning, affordable housing, accessible education, and so forth, it invites the engagement of an intersectional lens to see how these are climate change issues and vice versa. As Audre Lorde is oft quoted, there is no such a thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issues lives. To be in community with each other is a call to act in community and for community. And that means all in our community, not just the demographics we relied on 50 years ago, as those are not the demographics of 50 years from now. We know that inaction on climate change has consequences. So does inaction on equity and racial justice. It is not an either-or proposition. It is an invitation to the power of and. And as we face respective ecological and social emergencies and crises, just as there's a role for quick responsive action, there is a role for envisioning the long term, to invest in life-affirming systems as much as we respond to the oppressive and harmful ones. In the way that we restored ecological community, we can restore social community. As we invest in the resiliency and adaptability in our natural landscapes, we invest in the resiliency and adaptability of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. As we care for the ecological succession of a wildfire, we can do the same in its social counterpart. You've shown here and continue to show the power of collaboration and coordination. This is at the heart and creation of OneTam. As William Merkel, the supervisor of wildlife ecologists for the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, was quoted in Bay Nature, the whole idea is that we should be doing a better job of working consistently across boundaries to work on a landscape level. So working across boundaries for common goals, emergence from engaging in divergence and convergence, from that which is different and that which connects us. Sí se puede, pero hay que hacerlo. Thank you. With that, I'll stop and I'll see if I can share. Hi, Janet. Can I try sharing 5 slides just as the visuals already?
Sure. Let's see if Michaela can empower, or Samir can empower you to share screen.
There we go. So this is what I wanted to quickly share, that it has some maps that you're familiar with, that I understand, that are important, that matter in terms of the concerns of climate change, in particular sea level rise, and some of the work that we're called to do. And as I shared in terms of overlaying that with other maps, that where communities of color, for example, live, I was just mentioning in the last presentation, isn't random. And that when we hear racial segregation, isn't a thing to say, oh no, I don't like this, I feel uncomfortable about it, or that's in the past, right? That doesn't affect in the same way now. But that's not true. I'll send these out later, so this isn't about reading it. And Marin County, for example, being the most racially segregated. This is off of the work of the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. So you're welcome to go ahead and read the full reports there. And that in this component, the takeaway isn't to be able to say, well, it's a problem, but it is a call to action because it has effects on a wide range of issues. So that we see that today, the exclusionary housing practices, for example, of the past, has impact on the health of communities now. We can overlay asthma, we can even overlay COVID-19, and it maps over that. So I share this because as we do this work, by looking at these different layers of what it means to be an impacted community in terms of being affordable housing, in terms of transportation access, in terms of age, in terms of the identified community of color, of education, this can allow us to be attentive to these needs and concerns as we are also doing the needed work to tackle climate change. So with that, I'll pause so that we can, Janet, tend to questions as we proceed.
Okay, folks, if you have questions for Jose, we only have time for probably 2 or 3 right now. Please put them in the Q&A and not in the chat. That helps us. And right now, I don't have any other questions for Jose right now. Oh, here we go. Something just. Can you reiterate the policy issues that can be looked at more closely or frequently?
Yeah, I will. I'll touch on 2, and I definitely recommend that report by the Other and Belonging Institute. The key thing I think is to say that, so for example, affordable housing. And when I mean affordable housing, I don't mean purely in the kind of legislative designation of like this is what it means, or to purely associate it with low socioeconomic status. I think it'd be more about then how do we make housing affordable across the Bay at large. Because as we do that, if we have practices that narrow that, or we don't really look at its connected impacts in association with climate change, we can perpetuate those systemic inequities. And we may not call it redlining anymore, but we can look at the impact of that, whether it doesn't help readdress that or only perpetuates those separations. And so, for example, in Marin, you can clearly look at those maps and see the density of the Latinx community in the canal area, right? And that is not purely personal choice to be able to say, I choose to live there. It is what are all the structural elements that make it such that that ends up being the area that is most affordable, that is most accessible, because there are few other options.
Thank you, Jose. And I think we're going to do one more question. There are so many great questions that came in. So how about, are there any programs that available for increasing access to wilderness for underserved communities?
Yeah, there's many. And, you know, give credit to OneTam for its efforts, I know, over the years to ensure that even just through programming, that's accessible to communities both there in Marin County as well as beyond. There's affinity groups, of course, like the organization I founded at Latino Outdoors, and other affinity groups like Outdoor Afro that you may be familiar with, programs like Bay Area Wilderness Training, Yes, Nature to Neighborhoods Enrichment, for example. They all deserve support, and not just support in terms of like, oh, they'll bring the people over. It is what is a co-creation and an actual being able to work together that, and I'll just say it here, that it requires you being able to release some of the power you may have not presumed that you have, or that is within your ability to give. So that it isn't just come to my program and now I take it over. It'd be more, what does it look like to invite a community into this space in a way that I may have to approach it differently, learn differently, teach differently, or merely participate differently. And I appreciate the service animal.
Jose, you just answered the question that I was going to read, which was about how to more strategies for ensuring that grassroots organizations and marginalized voices are centered in public policy and funding decisions. So since I think you kind of just gave a bit of an answer to that, and in the interest of staying on time, I'm unfortunately going to end the Q&A session with you right now, and encourage folks to look for the opportunities for participating in an allies and inclusion conversation later in the month that will be hosted by some of our agency staff. So thank you again so much for joining us today, Jose. I really appreciate it.
Gracias. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.